Turning it off. Hello, everybody. Welcome. What's today? Tuesday or Wednesday? Tuesday?
It's Tuesday.
I really don't know.
Tuesday.
This is the day the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us this morning. Today I'm going to continue what I started yesterday. If I was going to make it into a series, I would call it something cool and clever, like faith moves. Get it? Like, these are faith moves and faith moves because faith is proven by its actions. Excuse me. Faith without action is dead. Faith without works is dead. And we started yesterday talking about Abraham and how do you know that you're in faith? And God told Abraham, I want you to pack up and I want you to go. And he didn't even tell him where to go. He revealed to him. Abraham had to hear from God to hear him to tell him to go, and he had to be willing to be obedient. Pastor Poe used to say the most important thing about hearing from God is obeying what he says. Sometimes we can just sit back and hear words. We want more words. I want a word from God. I want a word from God, And someone said, hey, Pastor, do you have a word for me? And I said, yeah, go obey all the other words the Lord has given you. And sometimes people are wanting a new word when they're really kind of blew over and dismissed the last word they heard. And so why would God give you a new word? All he's going to do is direct you back to the last thing he said, right? And so Abraham, in faith, believed God, and it was counted him as righteousness. He's called the father of our faith. And and so he heard God say, pick up and go to a place I'll show you, that I'm giving you as an inheritance, and I'll show you. So Abraham had to believe God to hear from him, and he heard in faith. He had to hear from God while he was journeying so that he could know when God says, this is it. And then it goes on to say that he had to continue to hear God for everything in that land, to inherit the land. And there are things, God gives you something, a promise. He gives you a land or whatever. But there are things that we do in cooperation with him. I don't want to get all up into it today, but we will at some point just talk about God is a covenant-making and a covenant-keeping God. And a covenant is an agreement between two people that if they break that covenant, at least at this time, a covenant meant if you break it, it was you die, you gave up your life, you died. Okay, that was how serious these covenants were. And God made a covenant with Abraham concerning his son, that he would have a son. Abraham had waited 25 years for this son, and he even tried to take matters into his own hands. Now, Abraham, by faith, received his son Isaac. Now, that's what we're going to talk about today. It's sort of like what happens next. So we don't really know how old Isaac was at this moment, or at least I don't. Maybe you do, but I don't remember seeing anywhere where we know how old he was at this point. But God told him, let's pick up I'm in Hebrews chapter 11. Let's see. No.
17, is it?
Is it 17?
Yes.
All right. Here we go. Thank you. Now, between what we read yesterday and down to where we're starting today, it talks a good deal. It's worth looking at and understanding. It drives home the point that this world is not our home. That God does not want us settling into this world and its ways. We read in Psalm 84:5 where it says, blessed is the one whose trust is in the Lord, whose heart is set on pilgrimage, which means you could say God calls us to embrace inconvenience. Because God's will is pretty much always going to involve change, which can be inconvenient. It's inconvenient for Abraham to pack up where he lived, where he was evidently doing fine, and move to a place. It's inconvenient that he didn't have all the info that he probably thought he needed. It's inconvenient to wait 25 years for the son that he was promised, you know. So the will of God often involves inconvenience. If you've made a commitment to get up early in the morning and meet with the Lord, that's not convenient, you know. And as Pastor Poe used to tell me, you'll have time when you make time. That came from, you know, he asked me several times if I wanted to go golfing with him, and one reason or another, I would say I can't, or I this and this, and I was in his office, and he said, "Would you like to go golfing with me?" And I said, "Pastor, I'd love to, I just don't have time." And he looked up from his Bible at me and he said, "Okay, listen, you'll have time when you make time." And I was like, "Okay, I'll go." So I'm going golfing with Pastor. Anyway, it struck me right in the heart, and I realized he called me out by his spiritual intuition and perhaps a word of knowledge that I was making excuses. It was true. I was kind of intimidated to go out and hang out with him in kind of a social way, you know, playing golf, and plus I stunk at golf, and you know, but I was seeing it as an inconvenience. And I should have been seeing it as God giving me a tremendous opportunity to connect with this great man, and at a deeper level. And so, and ultimately I did. Thank God for his grace, right? But the will of God always involves some type of inconvenience, you know. If you're going to, it's going to involve, inconvenience means sacrifice of something you're already comfortable with, right? So if you want to get up in the morning and really get the good stuff from the Lord, that means you're probably going to not be able to start that Netflix movie at 11 o'clock and goes off at, you know, 1:30 or whatever in the morning, and you know, it's just not going to happen. It's an inconvenience. Convenience, you just want to stay up and do whatever you want. But if you want something greater, there's always inconvenience. And another way you could say it is there's always sacrifice. We don't like that word, you know. But this is what we're going to talk about this morning. Verse 17, by faith, Abraham's still having to walk by faith, which means faith means you don't know how it's going to happen. You trust that God knows how it's going to happen, and God's going to make it happen, but you don't have all the info. You don't know how it's going to work. And we can read in this that that's where Abraham's head was at. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. God said, as Bob Dylan said, God said to Abraham, "Kill me your son." and so he
out of tune is in my head.
yeah, right. Out on Highway 61. And excuse us, okay? When he offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son. For those who have ears to hear, this was a setup by God. And if Abraham was willing to sacrifice his own son, then in covenantal terms, that freed, this may sound weird if you're not used to thinking about this, it freed God to later offer his only son. Wow. God works in covenant with us. What we're willing to do, then he can work on our behalf. And that's why he says, give and it'll be given to you. See, he gives us the power and the understanding to do it, but he expects us to step out first so then he can meet the need. There's no reason to have the provision if you're not moving into your purpose, okay? And a lot of folks are mistakenly, and it's because of fear, they hope to wait till they have all the money they need or the provisions before they do the thing, whatever the thing is. Whether it's buy a house, whether it's move to another state, whatever it is, they erroneously think that they're going to get this big pile of money that they can do that on without inconvenience. And it's not the way it works. Remember, the lepers were healed by Jesus. It says, as they went. They were going on their way in, then they received their healing. This is how faith works.
Right.
And it may be scary to some people, but you don't have to. You don't have to be scared, because the most sure thing that you can do is put your hope and trust in the Lord. He never fails.
Amen.
But the testing of our own heart and our faith is, are we willing to throw ourselves on his promises? Well, Abraham was. He took Isaac up, bound him, put him on the altar, and was about to plunge the knife down into his chest and kill him. And of course, you know the story. God stopped him and provided a ram. But here's the point. This is what I want you to get, because it blew me away when I was reading it. You know, when I read the Bible, I try to put myself in each person's place and think, what was it they thinking? What were they thinking? I don't really think of Bible characters as mythological heroes. I know that they were flesh and blood just like us, and they had to walk by faith just like us, and they went through stuff just like us. It was just a long time ago, so it's easy for us to think that more like you know, cartoon figures or not. No, these were real people. Verse 18, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called. In verse 19, this is what I love. Abraham concluded that God was able to raise Isaac up even from the dead, and from death, he also received him in a figurative sense. Now, this is what thrills me. Abraham is given a promise that through Isaac, man, you're going to have family that outnumber the sands on the beach, you know, the stars in the sky. And then in the middle of that, God tells Abraham, I want you to take the son of promise that I've given you, and I want you to sacrifice him. I want you to lay him on the altar. And it does not say that Abraham faltered at all, because Abraham concluded, even if I kill Isaac, God is able to raise him up from the dead. Man, that's faith.
That's awesome.
Think about it. He's a real dad, and Isaac's his real son that he had waited forever on. And then, Abraham trusted the Lord so much by faith, he figured, even if I kill my son, God is able to raise him from the dead and keep his promise. Now, here's our takeaway. What is your faith in today? What do you see as your provision? And is God asking you to lay it on the altar? See, God wanted Abraham not trusting in Isaac. He wanted Abraham trusting in him, which Abraham did, because he concluded that God was able to raise up Isaac. He didn't conclude that Isaac was able to raise himself up. He had to lay on the altar of death, and he was able to do it because his hope was in God. His hope was never in Isaac. His hope was in God, that God was going to use Isaac. You get what I mean? So today, is your hope in your job? Now that doesn't mean quit your job, or it may be, but what you need to do is the thing that you're looking to, you have to lay it down and let God resurrect it.
That's good.
Because God wants He wants us looking to Him, not that thing. He wants us free from the world and how the world thinks, and entangled up in Him, fully trust in Him. Our hearts set on pilgrimage, our hearts set on making peace with being inconvenienced. You know, if God wakes you up at 3 a.m. and wants to talk to you, you know, at least check it out. And he sometimes that's when you get the greatest revelations, man, is at the least convenient times. But see, if you sacrifice the Lord, as they say, if you sacrifice for the Lord, you can't outgive God. God is not going to be a debtor to you. He's not going to owe you. And I'm going to give you a real life example of this. This is a number of years ago. Michelle and I were really, really struggling financially. And I had done an art project or something which it was a pretty good payday. And one of the things that was the desire of my heart was to take Michelle and get her a designer dress. I think was it a dress or was it like a top and a dress with a jacket? Yeah. It was gorgeous, man. And I forget what brand it was, but it was a Liz Claiborne or something like that. But it had been a long time since I'd been able to bless my wife with something like that, and it was gorgeous. And you know how Michelle, how beautiful she is. I mean, she was stone cold gorgeous. All right, jaw dropping, man. Stopping traffic, baby. And when she put on this dress, I was like, dear Lord, what a blessed man I am. And then singing in the choir at this church, or singing on the front line, on the worship team, one Sunday they said the dress code, everybody needs to wear red. And there was another person on there who didn't have a red outfit. And Michelle wasn't on that day, right?
That's what it was.
And so she said, well, why don't you borrow mine? And it fit the lady perfectly. And while we were sitting in the congregation, Michelle was looking up there, and the Lord said, I want you to sacrifice that, and I want you to give that to her. And her first response was, I just got this. I literally have never worn it. But the way Michelle is, by faith, she said, yes, sir. And so she sewed that. And I'm not kidding you, I don't think it was a week later. Now, feel the emotions with me. I worked hard. We worked hard to get this dress, and God said, I want you to lay it on the altar. It's your Isaac. And after she did that, it wasn't many days after that, someone in the church came to her, someone who always dressed super nice, I mean like a model, came to Michelle and said, God put it on my heart for you to come to my house. And she opened her whole closet and she said, take anything you want. She sowed one designer dress seed, and I think she got 10 dresses.
Yeah.
And now this is what I mean. When God asks you to make a sacrifice, He doesn't leave you hanging. He blesses you. You can afford to lay your Isaac on the altar knowing that God is able to raise him up from the dead and fulfill the promise. Okay, I've gone on.
Real quick, He even provided a lamb. Remember that? Like He provided.
Yes, He did.
For Abraham to sacrifice. It was so cool.
I'm so excited about this. It's hard for me to shut up. So I may be talking about this again tomorrow, man. If you want to, just live by faith. And if you want to really live, you got to live by faith. And living by faith means you don't have all the answers, but you trust in the one who does. And He'll let you know what He wants you to know when you need to know it, okay? All right, well, I love you. Thank you for your support, your prayers. We got big stuff God's churning up in us and around us, and so we need your agreement with us. Big stuff coming up, and we need your agreement. And because we want to see this thing come to pass. We don't have all the answers, but we do know to step. All right. So, like Abraham, God says go, so we go, not fully knowing where we're going. So, but He will make it plain. He always does, and He'll do the same thing for you. So, you guys have an awesome day, and I'll talk to you tomorrow morning.